Johnny and James.
They are easily led.
Welcome back to Easily Led, the podcast that gets your spidey senses tingling for a bit of wargaming. I'm Johnny from Johnny Watson Gaming, and I've got James here with me from Scruffy Crow. And this is our second season, and we're finally under the way with it. James, how are you doing?
I have COVID-19, but other than that, fantastic. No problems at all.
Good. So a little under weather, but well up for a bit of season 2.
Yes, exactly.
Right, James, what have we got for today? Actually, no, before we go into that, I think it may just be worth sort of mentioning that season 2 might be just a little bit different, I think, to season 1. We've been talking about potentially having a few special guests on the show at some point, so there's a few things to look out for. So it just might spice things up.
Yeah, and as ever, if you guys have got ideas about what you want us to talk about, stick them in the comments. We'd love to hear from anyone you recommend that we
what we got tonight,
to
mate?
talk to. What have we got tonight? Well, we're going to have a quick chat about what we're up to at the moment, and then the main topic is going to be: are we all artists? Or alternatively, have you been painting wrong all your life?
So it's a big. That's a big difference there, isn't there? Are you an artist or are you terrible? But yes, so
the answer is yes.
So tonight's episode is going to be all about paint styles.
Yeah.
So I think what's the best way to kick this off is really let's talk about how we.
We're going to say what you've been working on in the meantime. Actually,
sorry, we've already got there, have we?
Jumping ahead.
I'm jumping well ahead. So for me, I've been working on a stone golem, which some of you guys may have seen the video that's come out fairly recently. Actually, I painted him using a terrain painting technique called leopard spotting, and it actually came out really well, or I think it did. I quite enjoyed that. So that was fun, and I've been continuing on with my little goblins. I'm still struggling to get a nice little 20 unit of these Kev Adams style goblins. Nearly there though. So James, how about yourself?
I have been absolutely churning out random sci-fi troops in preparation for playing a bit of 5 Parsecs from Home, which is a solo sci-fi role-playing rules. But you need some NPCs. So I've done a unit of robots, a unit of toadmen, a unit of Soviet pugs. So
I've seen some of them on your videos.
Yeah, just smashing out these
cool.
troops. So not necessarily painting to the best of my abilities, just making them presentable. Yeah,
nice. They do look really cool, and the game looks really interesting. So is the game? It's purely just a solo game.
Yeah, it's for making up your own sort of role-playing stories, but with miniatures. I mean, I've not tried solo gaming really yet, but I rolled my crew up using a sort of mixture of the random tables and matching to the miniatures I wanted to use, and I already started sort of figuring out a cool little story and using the sort of random results that I got on the tables to think of backgrounds for these guys. So it did already get me kind of involved. Solo wargaming is something that people have claimed is rewarding. I've never really understood the appeal, but I am intent on at least giving it a go. So at some point, hopefully in the next week or so, I'm going to play my first battle as part of that campaign, because it's a campaign system where you string a few sort of confrontations together.
I can only assume you'll probably be recording these and get them out as videos.
Oh, unless I absolutely hate it, yeah.
Nice. Well, obviously, yeah. Right then, cool. Should we get
there? Yeah. We're going to start with how we learnt to paint, I guess. Where our sort of first steps came from.
Okay, so I'll take this one then to start with. For myself, I think I was about sort of 8 or 9, getting into, and it was GW. And I think the first game I played was Epic, and then slowly got into 40k. And I remember looking at the pictures that GW used to put out, or they probably still do, where you've got a Space Marine and he starts off as a lead figure, and then he has a white spray coat, then he's got some red and then black on him, and then they put some metallics on, and then they highlight him up, and then they shadow him, and he looks really cool at the end. And as a kid, I weren't too fond of reading at the time, and so I could never really understand how they did that and how they got there. So all my first miniatures just really were a white undercoat with blood angels I was painting, red, black, straight colours. There's you can see the undercoat and all sorts. It was awful, and that's where that's how I painted for years. And I never got any better, because purely no one really sort of told me. I never had that person to say, right, this is what to do. How about yourself?
Well, I think my first sort of painting. So I started painting when I was quite a little kid. My dad gave me some old dwarves and some of the first plastic skeletons that used to be like a beige plastic.
Yeah.
Just to sort of mess around with, and I just sort of smushed the paint on. Once again, I was always shown a white undercoat, and I was always told you put the lightest colours on first over the white undercoat, and then sort of worked up to your darker colours, finishing in black. And I ended up with a few, possibly even old by them standards, white dwarves at some point. And I remember seeing there was an article about dry brushing chainmail over black.
Yeah. And
the whole idea of starting with black and the thing of dry brushing, I remember being quite young. I must have been, I don't know, 10 or 12 maybe. The idea that the technique that I read in this magazine, like, literally changed it. But then I didn't really paint much after that. And then I took years and years out, and I didn't get back into the hobby until I was 18 or 9, or about 18, I think.
Yeah. It's similar to me. I mean, I come back later on in life as well, but I'll come back to mine in a minute after you've done yours. Sorry.
But then I continued on with the black undercoat. But then I started off just. I said I had a friend that was into it, but he didn't really show me much. He was quite a good painter, so it was a lot of what he was doing just went right over my head. I started painting the sort of traditional Games Workshop way, which was black undercoat, a dark base colour, a lighter colour in the between, and a highlight. And then every single section had base, mid, maybe highlight. And that's just how I did it. That's kind of how the books were at the time as well.
Did it have a wash back then as well? Was you washing them?
I didn't start using a wash until the new, like, was it Delvin Mud and whatever the black one was called back then?
Nuln Oil?
Nuln Oil is what it's called now. I don't know if it had a different name.
Oh, maybe.
It might have been called Nuln Oil anyway. And then I used to hang around at the Games Workshop, actually in Sheffield as it was, and we used to do a bit of painting there, and I picked up a few hints and tips just through osmosis and just through people looking over my shoulder, and
I never had that. I never had that as a. Oh, this is when you was about 18, I suppose.
Yeah, and I didn't have a lot of money, and so a relatively sensible way to spend a Saturday, Sunday, sort of lunchtimes to afternoons was to kick around in the shop, and there used to be 20 odd of us that used to be regulars that you'd always know someone, say hi. They always had room for us. It was quite a nice little community. Yeah,
nice. I mean, so for me, on my progression from as a kid, so I fell out of the hobby when I was, I don't know, got to say 13, 14, stopped playing it. And I didn't actually come back until I was a lot later. I think it was maybe about 27.
All right, well, so a lot later.
No. Yeah, a lot later. A lot later, because I think it was just after I met my wife that I started doing it again. Didn't need to meet her. Didn't need to look cool anymore. So I started doing the hobby again. And for me, I actually started learning properly to paint through YouTube, and it was at the time a very new thing. So now obviously there's loads of painting tutorials out there, people showing you how to paint. But back then, there was a guy called Lester Bursley. I don't know if everyone remembers him. He seems to have stopped doing YouTube for whatever reason. I don't know, but he was fantastic. And I remember watching him, and I was sort of in awe of what he was doing. But what his videos were so good at was showing you how he did his techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his biggest thing was he brought in an airbrush. Okay, so when I got back into the hobby for the second time, back when I was a little bit later on in life, thought, do you know what? I'm going to try and make this easy for myself, and go and buy an airbrush and start using an airbrush.
That can't have been long before I met you, then.
No, very, very, very soon. The reason I went to that club was because I was started getting back into it. At the time, I didn't even have really any armies at the time because I lost them all or whatever. I was sort of rebuilding.
Yeah.
And at the time, if you remember, I was painting everything with an airbrush, and I was just following Lester Bursley's routine, his techniques.
That airbrush from Men Army was pretty good looking, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, and an airbrush can really do that for you. You can look good straight away with minimal learning skills. But so that's how I got back into it, and I started doing that. But then I very quickly, I now never use an airbrush. Funny enough, it's all I've gone backwards in my. Now I purely only use a brush. But yeah, no, for me to get back into it and for learning new techniques, it's always been YouTube. As a kid, I never went to Games Workshop enough to sit down and actually have someone tell me, so I never learned that way. Yeah, so YouTube's got a lot to answer for, really, for all my bad painting.
What about the tutorials? I suppose if you skip that middle section, then maybe you didn't use the tutorials in the army books so much as well. Because I think I got a lot of mine. Basic tips from the tutorials out of the 3 glossy pages in the middle of your.
Yeah, exactly. I totally did, because I come back into the hobby a lot later, so I started young, but when you're that young, you're not that interested in painting anything, at least to a good standard anyway.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to the age where your painting standard, it becomes a important part of your hobby, I'd left it. So yeah, it wasn't until a lot later on, and then by then I weren't bothering going through how to paint by Games Workshop. I was then watching a lot of the pros do it, and then started learning from that. So I don't know whether that's a better way or a worse way to learn.
It certainly explains, the next bit, I guess, about why we have pretty distinctly different ways of doing stuff.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, so that's how I sort of learn. It's for me through YouTube.
Yeah, I was curious because I think I've said before, I mentioned on my channel as well, I don't watch an awful lot of hobby YouTube stuff. I'm not very good at following a YouTube guide for painting. I don't really, not even the venerable Duncan Rhodes. I struggle to sort of apply what I can see. I don't know. Unless it's a very good video about a very specific style, but even then, I've learned sculpting styles maybe off of YouTube videos before, but never painting, which is a bit odd, really.
It is, but we'll come into this a little bit later. But obviously, you've got a very distinct style, but we'll come into that. Actually, maybe now. So.
Yeah. So what would you say your style is then? What
do we have a style? This is a really hard one. Do I have a style? The answer is almost certainly yes. I think everyone has a style, whether you're good or whether you feel like you're good painter, or whether you feel like you're a bad painter. I think you've got a style, whether it's a style that is copying someone else, or whether it's a unique style to yourself. You'll have a painting style. To actually describe it is a very tough thing to do. But and do you know what? I feel like I have two styles.
What's your technique though? I mean, I'll say for your style. I mean, you always have quite sharp highlights. Your models end up looking quite the word, it's sort of not spiky, but they're quite crunchy. I think
Yeah.
you go quite high with the highlights, which I've always quite
Yeah.
liked.
Yeah, sort of high. Maybe I try to go high on the contrast, so maybe
Yeah.
that's where you're getting that. Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me, I feel like I've got two styles. I'll have my style where I'm trying hard, and my style for army painting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think they are obviously very two different things.
I
When
think
you're painting,
I think it's your style when you're really putting the effort in that is more. It shows off that whether or not you've actually got a style of your own sort of thing. I think anyone can knock out a regiment. I mean, there is different. I mean, one person's regiment doesn't necessarily look the same as another, but there's less differences. I think when you just
agreed. No, I totally agree with that. Okay, so I like to incorporate a number of different techniques into my painting. So if I'm painting a model to my highest ability, it may not be old demon top notch stuff, but if I try and do my best, I will incorporate some wet blending in there. There would almost be certainly some glazing. So I will go down the sort of probably what people might see as more of the professional techniques, I guess. I like to try and I like to try. I like to try and push myself.
Yeah,
so
no,
I always try and try new different styles, try new or techniques, not styles. Try different techniques to see how they work and see if they work with me.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of that. For example, my last video actually, I've just put out it's me just trying a completely new technique that I've never tried before ever, and it's just an interesting one to see how I felt it worked. Actually, I thought it came out quite nicely.
You've done a few of those things, like the oils and stuff. I've noticed before. I think that's what comes from the fact that you're watching these very different painters online.
Yes.
And you've seen these new techniques.
Yeah. So my style is very sporadic. I think that's probably the best way to describe my style. It's sporadic. Whereas I think your style is completely opposite to mine, which you're just about to explain now.
Yeah, well, I think I have a relatively artistic, in a way, sort of. I struggle to make clean miniatures. When I focus, I can make quite clean paint jobs, I think. But day to day, that's not what I'm necessarily my be all and end all. I just try and make quite comfortable paint jobs. I think is probably how I'd.
Yeah, no, I don't want to. I don't. I mean this in a positive way, not a negative way at all. Because I love the way you paint. Your top effort is not too dissimilar to your sort of what you'd call maybe an army painting model in my eyes. But that's definitely not a slander or anything. That's actually sort of, in my mind, a praise, because your general armies look top notch because of it.
Yeah, so I struggle to do a standard army paint. I was gonna mention some more of that later. I think it's because I always do at least 3 shades on everything, and I think some people, when they're knocking out a big army, don't tend to. So
I get
some
that.
of the stuff. So I'm doing these sort of 3D printed Toad Warrior guys recently, and I really just could not put them down. Like literally, they had a base color on every area, and they looked fine.
Yep.
They're now all 3 highlights in. What happens is the longer I spend on a model, the finer detail it gets. So that's that's the reason I don't have a different style to say. They just get crisper lowlights and sharper highlights.
Yeah, and you probably like you say, you probably pick out those extra details that you probably wouldn't bother on an army painted figure. Yeah, and I get that.
Basically, I can take photos from closer. The more time I've spent on a model, the closer I can take a photo of it.
Yeah, no, I get that.
But yeah, my style is an old GW style. Like I said, I learned from every army I'd buy. I'd read the glossy pages in the center of the army book, and I'd follow those. I'd often do a few of my first armies in the original colours that Games Workshop sort of thing. But Although I play around with colours more. I've never really experimented like you have with different techniques. So I've always done. So my standard technique now is base coat, wash, base coat, highlight, highlight. That's
Yeah.
it. It doesn't matter what I'm painting. So I don't really tend to play around with too many techniques. I quite like wet blending, especially if I've got something large and organic.
Yeah.
But that wet blending is still part of that original thing. 'Cause it's literally I'm still just doing dark to light highlighting.
Yeah, of course.
I'm
I mean,
just doing it all at once.
I mean, wet blends and fun it could be a topic on its own in a way, but I use wet blending to get to a point, and then I glaze it out if I'm going to work so wet blending is very rare. Is it the final product? Because it can be, although it's very hard to get a wet blend to be absolutely smooth unless you're probably working with oils or something like that. But anyway, coming off the point,
Then you paint more.
I think for me the best way to describe your style, and again I mean this really positively, it's quite. You say it's like Games Workshop, old Games Workshop, but you've created your own thing out of that. It's not. It's definitely not old Games Workshop, but it's got like a cartoon feel to it. Like your miniatures always feel like they're miniatures. They're supposed to be a little bit funny, a little bit goofy. I love that.
Yeah. So
I
some of
look
the
at your
new techniques
miniatures
that I have learned, and one of the reasons why it looks like an old Games Workshop technique in my head, and it does actually. There are, if you look at the right thing. So Kev Dallimore is one of my sort of painting idols, and his models are very. They're not the most amazing sort of super photorealistic things in the world. They've got that kind of comic book esque thing, and one of the techniques that he teaches is painting undercoating black and then leaving black in almost all the creases, which then gives you that black outlined, literally drawn comic book style almost.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I quite like. I tend to use sort of black pin washes at the ends of my paint jobs sometimes as well. And
you know what? Do you know what? If I'm doing a model that I'm really gonna try hard at, I do black lining on them. So I go around with like a thin black and just line out all the panels and stuff, and that makes a massive difference. But that can sometimes, like you say, create a bit of a cartoony feel sometimes. But yeah, no, I really enjoy your miniatures. Always tell a story. That's what I love about your paint style.
That's why I can be quite fussy about what I paint. So I can't paint stuff like Malifaux and Infinity, because the style of those miniatures doesn't suit my style. Whereas something like Warp miniatures, I just painted up some kobolds, and I put a fair bit of effort in them, but they looked even to my eyes, and I'm quite critical normally of what I paint, really good. But that is because the sculpts and my painting style, match. They just high-fived. Yeah. They gave it the old predator fists. They were
big time. You've hit a nail on the head there. There's models that fit your painting style, and that is so true. That is so true. You hit a nail on the head that a model can match your style, and for you, it totally does. There are models that you will always make look good.
Yeah,
always. But I totally agree. Models like Malifaux, your style will struggle with them.
Yeah, I quite like nice big creases and raised details. I like early 2000s Games Workshop models for that reason. I think that sort of almost comic booky style that they sculpted in for those.
Even the early 90s as well. Anything up to that point.
Late 90s, early 2000s. The early 80s stuff. I don't know. I can paint it quite well. It's just not my personal taste then. But then as soon as we started moving to plastic and digital sculpting, that's when I started to sort of peer away.
I'm painting these Kev Adams goblins.
Yeah,
I absolutely love them.
Beautiful models.
I just love painting them. It's so much fun. But that's the point, isn't it? A model can just make you paint better just because you love the model. There's nothing worse than painting a model you hate.
I got a big handful of Kev Adams squigs the other week, And I meant to just put them away without painting them. I ended up painting most of them before I put them away.
Where'd you get them from?
A Nightmare Miniatures Kickstarter.
Oh, nice.
They're
Of course.
new sculpts, but
No, yeah, you did it. You did a video, didn't you?
I did, yeah. And I ended up,
Yep.
I ended up painting a couple for the video, which was on purpose, and then ended up painting like 2 or 3 more just because they were sat there in their lovely little sculpts.
Brilliant. So yeah, so in answer to that, we do have styles, and I honestly believe that everyone has a style. I don't whether you believe you're a good or a bad painter. I think no one is going to be exactly the same as you.
And I think as you get better, your style comes out more as well. So the more effort you put into a specific model, and as you develop more and get better more. And I mean, I can recognise I don't really know how to pronounce his name, but Angel Girl Face. That guy.
Angel Girl. Yeah.
Girels. Let me have to pronounce that in the chat, guys. But yeah, the sort of world famous miniatures painter. I can tell one of his models generally at a glance, and if it's not one of his, it's someone trying their very hardest to emulate his look.
Yeah. No, definitely.
With the glazes and the non-metallics and the
yeah,
there's definitely a look, and I think and he wins awards with a very distinct look.
Oh, easy. And there's a glut of painters at the moment online on YouTube. There are all sort of award-winning painters that are doing, amazing things, and getting big followings as well.
Yeah.
But they're the sort of people that people are learning off of, and they create better painters just by people watching that. People outdo them. It's just an ongoing cycle. And actually, we'll probably come to this in a little bit later. But but yes. So James, what's the difference then between old GW and Privateer Press?
Actually, I was just going to step back one for a second and mention another painter who has a very distinct style. Is Alex from Warp Miniatures. Hasn't been painting a whole bunch of time. He sculpts all his own minis, and it's one of the exceptions to what I said earlier about digital sculpted miniatures. I'm actually starting to find that some sculptors are making digital sculpted miniatures that I do like to paint. But he paints a lot of his own miniatures, and I've seen him paint and had a little paint workshop with him, and it's very similar to the way I do it, but he's got this weird obsession with glazing almost every single one of his models. Go to the Warp Miniatures website. Look, I think everything's on there is painted by him. He glazes almost every single models with Games Workshop Bugman's Glow, and he's got a style that is glazed with Games Workshop Bugman's Glow. And that
just that one paint.
Practically.
What, he glazes the whole miniature.
Not necessarily, but almost every colour and every miniature that I've seen him paint involved thin down layers of Bugman's Glow, and that ends up giving his paint. And he doesn't do it. He's not doing it as almost as a conscious thing. It's just almost like a. I certainly have crutches and habits that I fall back on when I want to just get a job done.
It's a habit.
And a lot of what he paints, the reason he paints is to have his miniatures painted. Whereas he used to employ people to do that, and he found that he preferred having, him doing the whole thing. You know what? It's weird that his necessity for speed and sort of ease, as well as just sort of comfort, has ended up giving him that quite style. And he's a good painter, and he has developed a very soft, friendly style that matches his sculpting. But it's quite unlike anything I've ever. No one will have shown him that, I don't think.
No, but I get that actually, because I think if we all look at our painting styles, there's always something that we always use, like a colour or for me, red's on everything. I always have red. For some reason, I don't know why, but yellow. I always use yellow. I can't stop using yellow for some reason. It's the worst colour to paint.
Slate grey is my fallback, because you can sort of a bluish slate grey. I've got a couple that I like, and you can paint something in that, and it stays interesting, but it also blends into the background. So I tend to use it for trousers and jackets and stuff, where you want them to be not black or brown.
Yes.
But you also don't want them to be the focus of the miniature. And I absolutely love a slate grey. It's been a long-standing habit. Yeah, I don't know what happens when I run out of great coat grey.
That and Agrek Surf Shade. Everyone loves a bit of Agrek Surf Shade.
Shade is. Well, there we go. Here, that does bring us on to this next bit that I just shoved us back from. So the way people learn, I think it does depend on the games they play, and obviously the way we just talked about, the way we taught. So I mean, I was taught to paint first the old Games Workshop way, white undercoats, bright colours, and then as Games Workshop got a bit more edgy in the early 2000s, black undercoats
with washes.
Not so much with washes, because when I learned to paint, there wasn't, and none of the guides in the army books really used washes much to start with. But yeah, it was a lot of dry brushing, base coats, and then just highlighting up to edge highlights. Yeah. And I think they even once invented some like super pastely coloured highlight paints and stuff as well. Point to try and convince people to do that sort of techniques and stuff. And then obviously dumping gallons of Delvin mud, now Agrek Earth Shade on things, is a popular sort of Games Workshop thing. And I think a lot of people paint that way because if you learn from the books and you learn from other Games Workshop type people, I think there's a very Games Workshop way of painting.
Yeah, agreed.
So when we started playing War Machine, and I did actually watch a couple of War Machine painting videos, because they actually had some quite good ones. And yeah, reading the guides in the War Machine books, because they were quite good actually as well. I tried the Privateer Press way of painting, which to me was completely nonsensical. They use triads of paints, and I really like P3 paints, and I'm very sad that you can't seem to buy them here anymore.
You're not?
I'm struggling, and I was in Element Games in Nottingham talking to one of the guys that orders the stock for Element Games, and he said they are practically giving up on them because they just can't get them reliably.
Privateer Press have just gone down. Oh, anyway, that's
Oh yeah. Well, we've kind of dealt with that in previous episodes, but
we have. Well, let's not divulge.
But anyway, so they sell their paints in triads, or at least pairs.
Yeah.
But yeah, the way they tell you to paint in their tutorials is you cover the whole model in a mid-tone, and then you take a brush and you go into the crevices with a dark tone, and then you highlight your highlights, which just seems nonsensical to me. I don't.
It blew your mind.
It did. No, I tried it a few times and I didn't. I used the Privateer Press painting guides, but then did it the wrong way around. And this is what why I wanted to call the episode like, have we been doing painting wrong all this time? Because and I got better technique. I got better results that way because I was painting the way I knew.
Yeah.
And my trolls are pretty much sort of paints, what's the word? Rule book paint scheme, I think.
Yep. I think they are.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Well, I used the paints called things like troll blood skin and stuff. And yeah, that was just absolutely blew my mind. And there's obviously other ways of doing things. And now the way that Games Workshop's teaching people to paint now, if you go and talk to a Games Workshop manager or go on the website tutorials or anything, it's changed completely again because now it relies even more on washes, almost glazing with washes. And
what, Privateer Press do?
No, the new Games Workshop way of painting.
Oh, sorry, the new
the current Games Workshop way of painting relies on a lot of washes.
Well, it's all the contrast paints, isn't it?
Yeah, and contrast is essentially just washes and glazes.
Yeah,
all in one, really.
Well, it's just a thin paint. I mean, I don't see that there's much difference between a contrast and a wash.
Did you ever use inks? Have you ever used inks?
I have, yes.
They remind me more of inks.
Yeah, so they're highly pigmented, but they flow like a wash.
But they're quite transparent.
Yeah,
it's hard to mix. It is hard to mix that out of your own acrylic paints, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I've got a few that I use really regularly, but I've tried a dozen of them, and I have 2 or 3 that are part of my toolkit now.
I use only a couple, and I use them like washes. Is that bad?
No, I use the snakebite leather, often quite like a wash. I use that when I'm cheating and doing big units though, because I don't tend to highlight after using that. And I use the silicon grey, and I use that for pin lining.
Right.
It's a little bit nicer than the black one, I find.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, or doing sort of really worn metal, in which case I use it more like a glaze. I use it to dull down metal colours, but yeah. So yeah. They're highly pigmented washes, the way I tend to use them, honestly. But I have tried a cool technique that I actually saw in a Games Workshop video, which was making something look like brass by painting it silver, highlighting it silver, so it was very bright, shiny, almost chromy looking.
Yeah.
And then giving it a couple of layers of thinned down snakebite leather. And you end up with this really warm, bronzy looking colour.
Yeah, I get that.
And it adds to your low lights, but then your shiny chrome highlights are still kind of there, but they look like but they're now all yellow.
Yeah.
But then you've also knocked almost all the metallic off in a way, and because of the layers, the light shines through it. I don't know. It was quite an interesting.
Yeah, I like that. It's nice. It's nice. Yeah, it's different.
I don't know how often you'd use it. I painted a statue, but it was
yeah, true.
Just something to try. But yeah, no, I think so. If you started now, though, if you were a 8-year-old when you start, probably when I started.
Yeah, about 8. Yeah.
And you walked into a Games Workshop, that's the way they teach you to paint. I think they teach you to paint almost with definitely base coats. They still have a base coat, and Games Workshop base paints are some of the best paints ever. Not a big Games Workshop fan as a general rule, but Games Workshop base paints till I die.
The yellow. The yellow's the best.
Oh, the Idrin. No, Iron Dark Sun.
Avalanche Sunset is the best.
Right.
But for yellow, unbelievable.
Is that? No, I think I use a different one. For yellow, but still, yes, very good. That's making me peer around onto my paint table now. Which yellow do I use?
So that actually brings us on to do you use different paints or mixes? For me, for me, I've got a big mixture of my go-to paints are Vallejo. Nearly all of my paints are Vallejo. I've got P3 as well. I've obviously got GW, and I've got a couple of other little brands which I can't find them at the moment, but I don't know what they are. I can't remember what they are. I've even got a set of inks as well, Down Around inks, which I use every now and then. So yeah, I don't necessarily stick to one paint brand, albeit that Vallejo being my main source of paint, but that's just because I bought them originally because they were cheaper than like GW stuff when I first got back into the hobby, and I just happened to have a load of them.
They do, they do have a nice sort of coverage pigment thing, but
I like how
I gave you
work.
a handful of them at one point because they tasted really bad.
Yeah, I like how they work. They're probably, if you're going to put a spectrum of paints together, they're probably right in the smack bang in the middle. They're probably not the best, but they're not the worst. So they're kind of good for that. And the question of do you use different paints? I think if you want to improve your painting and get better, I think the answer is you kind of have to, because there are different paints. There's different brands of paints that are better at different techniques. So there's definitely,
yeah, for sure. But what I meant by that before was, do you use, if you're going to do a base, a mid, and a highlight?
Yeah.
Do you use 3 different named paints?
Oh yeah, I don't care about that.
Or do you mix your own colours?
Oh well, so I probably do a bit of both. I do a bit of mixing, and I would use. I don't mind. I'm not like someone who's like, oh, I've used Vallejo for this colour, so the next colours have to be Vallejo to bring it up to highlight. I don't. I'm not. I'll use a green and a Games Workshop green and a
Because if you look
whatever
at a
it might
Games
be.
Workshop guide, it'll say use skin tone,
Yep.
use brown skin tone, use beige skin
Yep.
tone, use white skin tone.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd be more tempted, especially as I move on now, I'm tempted to pick up brown skin tone and white skin tone, and I'll mix my own beige skin tone for the middle, which is one of the reasons why I think my paint style looks a bit different to yours sometimes, because there's less contrast between my layers sometimes, I think.
Sure.
Because I'll do
Yeah, that makes sense.
an almost infinite number of
Because you're
highlights.
you're running from you're just mixing your medium, your base shade or whatever, your medium shade is essentially a mix between your highlight and your low light.
Yeah, that's what I've started to move
quite
towards.
often.
Yeah. And I just find that's a really comfortable way of painting that I've picked up. When I don't want an awful lot. I mean, if I want an awful lot of contrast, then I will. I've always struggled. I think it's because I'm a little bit colorblind. Unless a paint's actually specifically, so I used a few of the Foundry paints, and I wasn't a big fan. They do specifically are sold in triads, so there'll be forest green A, B, and C. And if if I'm going to paint something green, I will use A, B, and then C. But even then, some of those triads I find don't necessarily work that nicely to my eye. They clash a little bit, so it's a funny old thing. So I've always struggled to pick good paints that highlight nicely on each other. That's, you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I get that.
So I've tended to mix my own highlights and stuff. Yeah. And mids and which is why I like a wet palette, and I don't use it enough.
Yes, and that is the beauty of a wet palette. It keeps it because then you don't lose your paint. Then you've mixed something. It's sometimes very hard to get that same color back. Whereas on a wet palette, it's obviously going to be lasting a lot longer. I mean, I do that all the time, but I don't sort of think about it really. Whether I make it a conscious decision to make sure that I've mixed my low light and the highlight together to make my mid-tone. Sometimes again, I suppose it depends on whether I'm in a rush or not. Because if it's easier just to pull 3 bottles and
I think you've got a bit of a better color eye than me though, so that might also help give you a.
I mean, maybe. I mean, also at the end of the day, I mean, there's loads of times where the idea of a triad is a bit of a fallacy. I think you don't need a triad to make a nice contrast miniature. I mean, if you look at some of the top painters, I mean, they use a hell of a lot more than a triad.
Oh yeah.
So a triad's just a quick way of creating some sort of highlight and low light out of a mid-tone.
I think that if I was ever the purpose of wargaming painting, I think the idea of a 3-step any color would be if someone asked me, what would be my biggest tip, I would say paint everything 3 times basically.
But you say that right. I've come when it comes to sort of army painting or painting, sort of tabletop standard.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of my stuff I've found you can miss. You can almost miss the mid-tone. If you paint the base color.
Yeah.
You wash the miniature, and then go in with your highest highlight. You get that sort of contrast straight away, and you've only actually painted it twice rather than 3 times. It doesn't work every time. Doesn't work on everything.
Yeah.
And actually, this works a lot better on say smaller scales, so 15mm downwards. It works much better there because obviously you want the higher.
You can't put that many. Yeah, that's one of the things I've discovered recently is that my painting style doesn't. I'm gonna have to do some more work to try and adapt that to smaller scales.
Yeah, you need to translate. So, but it also does sometimes translate itself to 28mm. Like for example, on these goblins I'm doing, so the hilt of the weapons only gets 1 highlight. So it gets the base, it gets a wash, then it gets a highlight.
Yeah,
But it still looks.
base wash highlight
it still
is
looks good.
base wash highlight
still
does the
looks good.
same job though, and that's
Exactly.
almost base wash highlight is almost the privateer press way if you think about it, because you start with essentially what's your mid-tone.
Yeah.
You then
Darken
the
it.
recesses.
Yeah.
And then you highlight the highlights. So that's
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is it.
Base wash highlight is solid, but base wash base mid-tone highlight is, for me, I said, once again, we're talking about different styles, and I said that probably was one of the reasons why my tabletop standard doesn't look that much different from my
agreed. Yeah,
taking photographs of it standard.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, because already I'm sort of saying my tabletop standard, I straight away I lose a couple of steps because I can't be asked, whereas that is the way your style is that you just do that you can't, you find it hard to go away from that.
I find it hard to put a miniature down, I think, as well. I mean, as I said, with those Toad Warriors that I'm doing, they looked fine base coated. I mean, they looked fine base coated and washed, and I'm sure they're going to look fine base coated, washed, and highlighted.
Yeah, I thought that about my goblins. I thought, do you know what? They actually look quite good just washed. But I thought, no, I can't do that. I'm not that person.
Well, the thing about the hilarious thing about these Toad Warriors is they might get caught in the occasional little clip if I film a video of one of my games, but mostly they're just for me. The miniatures were essentially free because they're files I already owned as part of a Patreon. They are printed, so they cost pennies. No one else is ever really going to see them. But,
yeah.
And I'm only painting them just out of necessity, but whatever.
No, that's it.
So I think that covers that. Different manufacturers of paints though. Similar to you, I don't use Vallejo because it tastes really bad. I do have a couple of their game color ones specifically for World War II.
James, you're not supposed to eat the paint.
No,
you know that.
I do.
I tell you, right, I'm going to give you a bit of advice. Never paint with oils. If you just start licking it, that's not good for you.
I've never been that tempted to try the oil washes, if I'm honest. I've watched a couple of videos on it, and I've seen the technique, and it looks good, but it's not for me.
But if you've got a habit of putting that brush into your mouth whilst it's got paint on it, please don't ever do it. We'll find you laying dead on the floor.
Oh, because rinsing it off in terps.
Yeah. Sorry, mate. I've stopped your train of thought.
Do you know what? Once I had. I was painting and I wasn't paying exactly enough attention, and some paint slightly dried on my brush, and I actually did give it a rinse in some very strong rum, and it actually did do the job of loosening up the paint a little bit.
It'll do that. Yeah, that'll work.
But no, so I've got a couple of Vallejo game colours just for World War II stuff because they're very specific. Shades.
Yes.
I've got the Russian uniform, English uniform.
I mean, blimey! I mean, that's even a style. I mean, we haven't even touched on that as a style. We're all sort of talking about.
Well, yeah, let's talk about. I mean, we've talked about Games Workshop, Privateer Press, and New Games Workshop, but I mean, historical magazines, tutorials have. And I mean, I've read. I was subscribed for a couple of years to the Miniatures Wargaming. They have a lot of sort of paint tutorials and stuff, and it is a lot more basic. Historical wargaming, a
lot more. They use a lot of dry brushing in that in historicals.
Base and dry brush. They don't even use washes that much, do they? It's base and dry brush.
No,
get it on the table.
Yeah, and then big time. But you got to remember, these guys, especially if they're doing something like Napoleonics, you've got to bash out so many miniatures, and you can understand why that is the case. I mean, there's some great YouTubers which we'll come on to in a minute. They do some fantastic paint jobs with their historical stuff. But
one of the things that blows me away about historical painting in the magazines and stuff is that the significantly lower standard of historical paint jobs than fantasy paint jobs. And it's something about the community and the culture. Maybe, I don't know. There's something about the way that's sort of developed where that seems
they don't have, and I think, and in a way it's kind of a nicer culture. They don't have a competition sort of side to them in terms of, well, my army looks better than yours. They don't seem to have that
Is
as
there
much.
is there, well, I don't. I seem to get the impression that the
I
painting
think
side of the hobby is almost less important as well. Whereas I
no,
think of
no,
it as
I don't think that's the case. I think
they're more collectors and gamers, maybe, or
possibly, but I think there's a more of a respect for for gamers who can get an army on the table,
yeah,
because you've got to paint so much. It's more about, wow, you fair play to you. You've done 200 miniatures in 3 weeks to play this game. It's more about that sort of respect rather than, yeah, but look, that's a bit, it's a bit rubbishy, bit painting there. But what they do when they historical gamers, they're much more picky with the colours that are used.
yes.
And that's something you don't get on the fantasy side of things, because no one really cares what colour you paint a space marine, whatever colour you want to paint him.
No. If someone goes, I've painted all my goblins red, which I've seen. Red goblins look kind of cool, by the way.
Yeah.
People go, wow, red goblins, that's cool. Blue orcs, I've seen blue orcs.
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that. People don't.
But if you paint a buckle wrong on your hussars,
Yeah.
you're in trouble, mate. And that's the difference. It's not necessarily about the skill of the painting. It's about the colours that you use. I think that's where their focuses lie quite often. Which,
and I mean, if we're covering the whole scope of wargaming, there is one more style that we've not mentioned, and that is umbral enamels.
Oh my god!
And a big old brush.
Yeah, well,
I actually watched a couple of tutorials. There was a tutorial in the Miniatures Wargaming magazine that led me down an enamels rabbit hole, like enameled cowboys. That look of a slightly melted cheese face with two black dots where their eyes should be.
I know, but some people love that.
Love it. They absolutely. Yeah. That's the style they're aiming for.
Yeah, but that's because I tell you why. Because it takes them back to their childhood.
And I read this fascinating article with this guy who painted that way, and he was trying to teach a wargamer like us, of our sort of generation, how to paint that way, but more why. The guy was given, a cheap paintbrush and a set of enamels, and said, "Go on, do it," and he, blended them and tried to highlight and. And yeah, it was a really fascinating, because it's just like, no, that's not the point. That's not the point of this hobby.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah,
you're making tin soldiers. Make the tin soldiers look like tin soldiers. Which is
well,
if that's what brings you joy, then actually, fair play to you. Melted Jesse James.
Oh,
shooting
do you know what?
That blobby Indians.
That actually brings us really nicely onto the next point. And that is there any way that's better than the others? Because what you've pointed out there is, it really is all in. It's kind of all in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? If you want a tin soldier, and you want to make him look like a tin soldier, well, use umbral paints.
Yeah.
Don't start glazing him to death with your nice shiny GW pots that you spent a fortune on.
Make him actually shiny.
So the question is then, James, is there a way that's better than the others? What do you think?
I would say, as I always say at this point, sort of in the episodes, yes and no. Because as you write, the best way to paint a miniature is whatever makes you the happiest.
Yeah.
If I'm honest. And I, for instance, have found the weird thing that I don't paint miniatures from stuff like Malifaux and Infinity, because it doesn't matter how I paint that, it doesn't make me happy. So I could, even if turns out that I could paint them and they were they were award winning, that still wouldn't be the best thing for me.
Yep.
And as I said, blobby red coats with their big bearskin hats, that is exactly what makes you happy, then that is the best way. But at the same time, I think if you want to be a good painter, and if you want to do cabinet standard stuff, or even Tabletop Plus stuff, which I think is kind of where I place a lot of what I do. I would call it Tabletop Plus.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, mate. I'd agree with that.
Then I think there are certainly techniques that a lot of people learn that you shouldn't do. So, or no, that's not true. You shouldn't not do, but you shouldn't rely on. So I would say that washers and dry brushes are fantastic where they're fantastic, and they are fantastic for beginners because you can give a beginner washers and dry brushes and a couple of other paints, and they can knock out a pretty respectable looking army. And if your goal is to knock out an entire army in an afternoon, then that's the only way to do it, I'd say. But if you're trying to paint to a good standard, one of the first things that changed my painting style, one of the first things I ever changed in my painting style in 20 years, was that I tried to stop dry brushing. And anywhere where I'd instantly go, well, I'm going to dry brush that, I actually picked up a smaller brush and highlighted it. And it takes patience.
Yeah, of course.
But then you pull it back away from your eyes, manage to get your eyes uncrossed for a second, and look at it and go, "No, that was worthwhile."
Yeah.
Yep. And I would say, there are certain things like just dousing your whole model in Agrax Earthshade that is amazing if you're doing tabletop.
Yeah.
But is not a good way of painting, technically.
I mean, if you want to win a painting competition, whether it be Golden Demon or other,
I would say the easiest, the lowest level of painting competition is a sort of best painted army sort of tournament competition.
But I'm talking. Look, I'm talking. If you want to win a reputable competition, okay, you want to be some of the best guys out there. You have to master glazing. You have to. That's because that's where it's going now. Because everything's so smooth, everything's so realistic. I mean, some of the stuff they come out now. I mean, for Space Marine, for example, they're making their faces look like they are real people. I mean, it's insane. So you've got to master that technique. Okay,
and I would normally say that if you're trying to get good at painting, that a good pointed brush is better than a fine brush. But if you're going to be that level of painter, then I actually revert back to saying, no, you do need a tiny, just insanely tiny brush to get some of those details back in.
And I think
airbrushes are pretty much, I would say, mandatory if you're going to do award-winning painting.
I think they help. They certainly help. I think there's a lot of painters out there that win stuff that don't use them.
Really?
Because you can still get the same results. But you get that through glazing.
Glazing.
And it's like, it's not just like, oh, I glaze it once, I glaze it twice, I glaze it 3 times. Oh yeah, they spend they spend hundreds of hours on one miniature, and like one section might take like a week or 6 week, not 6, like a week. Where just glazing over the same area over and over until it's so smooth. But that's the dedication you need to become the best. But then we're not really saying.
I don't think that really applies to most people, though. I think
no, it does. It doesn't.
I think
the question is, James, is there a way that's better?
Is there a way that's better? I don't think there's a way that's necessarily better. But if you want to aspire to better painting, as I said, I think you've got a couple of routes. I think the worst way to paint. There's definitely a worse way to paint, and that is just to paint the way you always have. I think that even if you put yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit, you will actually enjoy it a little bit more. And I think then you've got 2 routes you can go down. You can go down the route that you go down, or the route that I go down. And I think your route is that you experiment, you try new techniques, you research quite different ways of doing things. And then you apply that you add that to your toolbox.
Yep.
Or you do more what I've done, and I try and get I've tried to get better at what I do by refining it. I've been applying some more color theory.
Yep.
Some I
Yeah,
feel
so
like
you're still using you're still going down your similar sort of technique, but you're using your knowledge of different theories, different techniques to help you
and I'm just
improve that. I
using
think,
use just being more careful, as I said, rather than just going, I'll stick a dry brush on that. I will highlight that up individually. It's still the same paint essentially, or the same color, but I'm just applying it in a different way, rather than just doing a highlight, a wide highlight. I will maybe do it as a. So I use a technique that's somewhere between wet blending and glazing.
Yep.
And I use a wet palette to allow me to have multiple colours on the go at the same time that I will apply to the model all wet at the same time. And I'll just sort of push them around in the water until it looks the way I want it. And I will spend
definitely.
hours on a patch of skin just with all the colours wet. And it's a mixture of that of the wet. I've never tried two brush wet blending, which I believe is a popular way of thing. I've always more or less just used the white. I sometimes have a water brush.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I did a bit of two brush wet blending in that last video.
Yeah, it's kind of what you were doing there. So you have a brush, a blank brush essentially, just with water on. I use almost like a clean, almost moist but mostly like dry brush when I'm doing that to sort of so I can. So for instance, like in a crevice that I think's almost too dark, I'll glaze it over, and then I'll just drag some of the paint out that leaves some of the pigment and gives a slightly lighter glaze. But then, yeah, and that's what I think. But it's still very much my style. I've not really learned.
Gotcha.
I'm not trying to apply new techniques. I'm just trying to refine what I do, and I think that's got me to get better. So I think you should push yourself. So I think that there isn't necessarily a better style or way of painting that you'll get the most out of it. I think, but the worst way is probably just to do the same old thing, because then I think you probably will just get burnt out. And you might not enjoy it anymore.
I think I can probably answer this actually in one fell swoop. And the best way is just to practice. Practice. It's the only way any of your techniques are going to improve. You just got to put paint on a miniature and not be scared of it. Because I think a lot of people sometimes are afraid of messing up a miniature they've just brought, or you've just got to get paint on the miniature. That's the only way to improve or even bring out your style.
Yeah, and as a wargamer as well, in a sort of tabletop situation, I'd much rather play against the worst painted, terrible painted Marines in the world than the Grey Horde all day, every day. Yeah, and if you enjoyed slapping that paint on, then more power to you. And I would I'd rather paint against someone's hand painted creations than I've met people that don't enjoy painting at all. They're not even interested in painting. And commission painters are great for what they do, and I think some of them have probably got, interesting styles and stuff. But I've painted against commission painted, like more prevalent in 40k, I think. And they're a little bit soulless, because whoever painted them didn't paint them. I've done commission work, and I'm not very good at it because I put too much effort in, I think. But even then, I don't put necessarily the same love and care into a model for somebody else.
Yeah, agreed.
The mercenary work than I would for my own stuff. So I think I'd probably rather play against a lovingly painted army than a well painted army.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So James, then, I mean, we've kind of done our final thoughts, I think. But have you got any final words to put to this topic to bed?
Yeah, I'm not really sure we've come up with any conclusions. I've actually, once again, after another episode of this, left me more to think about. I think it was interesting to understand why we paint differently.
Yeah.
this would be an interesting topic to bring up with a guest maybe at some point down the line. Actually,
I think so. I think so. I think so. It's a fascinating topic
because I think
because
it's probably
really
unique for everyone,
this
isn't it?
well, it is, and it's also it is the crux of the whole hobby, isn't it? I mean, yeah, okay, we all play the games, but we all these games require painting.
I think more
So
people probably paint than game as well. I think there are definitely gamers out there that don't paint, like I just mentioned.
Almost certainly.
But I think they're rarer than people who literally
certainly.
just collecting paint. I mean, essentially over the last year or so, or the last 2 years, I've painted substantially more than I've gamed.
Yeah.
That has been more of a major part of my hobby than the gaming.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, I'm totally on that as well. I think I enjoy painting more than I do gaming in a lot of respects. I enjoy the process of it all. It calms me down, makes me, relaxes me. So it's something about it's sort of very zen, isn't it? But
can be. I prefer modelling to painting in general.
No! That's no. Sticking models together is the worst thing in the world. Oh, hate it. But yeah, I think for my final thoughts on this is that everyone has a different style. Everyone can be good or bad. Doesn't really matter. It really sort of matters to the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
What you see is as good standard may not be seen as a good standard by others. I think
that tends to be the other way around, actually, because I was just thinking that, and I was thinking that I think people are almost always more critical of their own paint jobs.
Oh, definitely. I mean,
someone else's.
I'm gonna put this to you, right? I love the way you paint. Okay, I love it. It fills me with joy every time I see your miniatures. I love looking at them. I could spend hours looking at them, but I probably would tell you now, and you would agree, they won't win a Golden Demons.
Oh, I'm never going to win. So, but there again, I don't think. I think that Kev Dallimore would struggle to win a Golden Demon, and he is a professional, famous, has a big book painter. I think that's not necessarily.
No, but what I'm saying, what I'm trying to put out there, is that I see your miniatures as fantastic, but they're won't necessarily be seen as fantastic by everyone, and that's the point, isn't it? I mean, and the same for me, same for my stuff. Some people will love it, some people will just say no, it's not no good.
You've got a wonderfully sort of clean, sharp style of painting as well. I can't really, certainly I wouldn't achieve. But
my point is though, it doesn't matter your style. You just want to nurture it and build it. And that's the point. It's all about having fun, isn't it? At the end of the day,
it is all about having fun. I think that is the main thing. I think, and
so, because I think for a lot of people to be the best is fun. For me, trying to win a competition would be the worst thing in the world. I couldn't force myself to sit there for. I get bored so quickly. I couldn't do it.
So I've sat down in front of a couple of miniatures. So I've won small painting competitions.
Yeah,
and I tend to, I would never paint a 28mm model for a painting competition, because my best work is done on monsters for painting competitions.
Yes.
And my Red Dragons won a couple of little amateur jobs.
Yeah, but it's really nice. It's really nice. It is really nice.
And I keep meaning to do the Green Dragon the same and take that to Salute, just to win a runner-up badge. But I think there is something about trying to put your absolute all into it for a reason for a competition. I can see why you'd win a competition paint, but I think I doubt the number of competition painters that cross over into gamers is very much. And in my head, even for fun, even just for the fun of it, I would rather paint a lot of minis than one mini really well.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Because I just like painting minis. I mean, the limit, the stuff I'm doing at the moment is reached the limit of a lot of minis for no good reason at the moment. But yeah, I really enjoyed putting my Stargrave crew together, for instance. I did.
Oh, they look lovely.
I did some top-notch paint on
really
really nice minis. and that was really enjoyable because I put
You know what?
put a lot more effort in than I normally would, and it paid off.
I've got my Stargrave crew on the desk. They're going to be next, so I'm looking forward to that because they look bloody cool.
Well,
yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I think we've done painting then. So yeah, you
Yes, we
guys
have.
down in the comments, please let us know if your thoughts on all of that. But also, yeah, how did you learn to paint? Do you think you've got a different way of painting than me and Johnny? From what we've described.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
just give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, give us your thoughts. And before we go, we always have a little recommendation. And this week's recommendation is more of a shout out. And it's going to be to a guy called Von Kettering. His YouTube channel out there. He mainly deals with historical gaming, but he's such a nice bloke. Guy called Fraser over there. And he does a lot of help for a lot of new YouTubers coming through, and he does a lot of shout outs. So I just wanted to say a bit of a big thank you to him for all the work he's done for all these different people out there in the community. So if you haven't seen him, he's got quite a big channel, so it's probably likely you might have done. But if you haven't, please go and check him out. We'll leave a little link in the comments below to his channel.
Yeah, for sure.
I really enjoy watching his stuff. He cranks out armies like it's fun. It's insane, and his paint jobs are beautiful as well. So head over there and have a little look, because it is quite incredible. And if you can find the videos about his Prussian army, wow, it's huge and it's so nice. But yeah, so that's my little recommendation of the week. Head over there, give him a like, give him a subscribe if you haven't done so already.
Excellent.
So James, that's us, I think.
Yeah, that's the end of season 2, episode 1.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Catch you later, guys.
Catch you later. Bye.